Most empires begin by demanding that people become something else. One ruler, more than 2,500 years ago, tried something different. He conquered vast territories and then allowed them to remain themselves. At the time, this did not look revolutionary. It looked practical. It would prove to be something more. Welcome to the history of the world, where we explain how power rises, how systems endure, and how empires fall. To understand what made Cyrus of Persia the Great, we must begin in a world where greatness was usually measured in fear. In the centuries before Cyrus rose to power, the Near East was dominated by empires that governed through intimidation. The Assyrians, whose capital lay at Nineveh, perfected a model of rule based on spectacle. Cities that resisted were destroyed. Populations were deported. Relief carvings depicted flayed enemies and mass executions. The message was deliberate. Resistance would not merely fail, it would be remembered painfully. This approach worked, for a time. Assyria built one of the largest empires the world had yet seen, but the system required constant pressure. Fear demands renewal. The moment central authority weakened, subject peoples rebelled. Assyria collapsed not because it lacked military strength, but because its model of rule left little loyalty behind. Babylon inherited much of Assyria's territory in the late 7th century BCE. It ruled with less overt brutality, but it relied on similar tools. Conquered elites were removed. Populations were relocated. Religious legitimacy was carefully managed, but political control remained centralized. Order was imposed from above. Into this landscape stepped Cyrus II, born around 600 BCE in the region of Anshan, in what is now southwestern Iran. At the time, the Persians were not a dominant power. They were one people among many, subordinate to the Median Empire. Cyrus inherited a small kingdom under Median oversight. There was no obvious sign that he would reshape the region. Around 550 BCE, Cyrus revolted against his Median overlord, King Astyages. The details are fragmentary, preserved through later Greek accounts and Babylonian records, but the outcome is clear. Cyrus defeated the Medes and absorbed their territory. What he did next is more important than the victory itself. Instead of dismantling the Median administrative system, Cyrus preserved it. Instead of eliminating Median elites, he incorporated them. Median nobles retained influence. Median customs continued at court. Cyrus adopted aspects of Median dress and ceremony. He did not present himself as a destroyer of the old order. He presented himself as its rightful successor. At the time, this seemed reasonable. He needed stability. He needed cooperation. But the decision had structural consequences. By preserving local elites, Cyrus reduced the incentive for rebellion. Former adversaries became administrators. Conquest did not mean humiliation. It meant adjustment. The empire doubled in size, without doubling resistance. This was not mercy, it was calculation. Within a few years, Cyrus turned westward toward Lydia, a wealthy kingdom in Anatolia ruled by King Croesus. Lydia controlled key trade routes and possessed immense resources, including some of the earliest coinage systems in the region. Croesus misjudged Cyrus's resolve and attacked. The Persian response was swift. By 547 BCE, Lydia had fallen. Again, the pattern repeated. Croesus was not executed in the immediate aftermath, as many defeated rulers would have been. Accounts differ on the details, but what is consistent is that Lydia's economic structures were preserved. Trade networks continued to function. The administrative apparatus remained largely intact. Cyrus did not dismantle what worked. He absorbed it. This approach mattered economically, it mattered politically, it also mattered psychologically. Conquest no longer meant annihilation of identity. It meant submission to a new center, but continuity in daily life. But beneath the surface, something more subtle was happening. By allowing conquered regions to retain their customs and elites, Cyrus shifted the burden of governance. Instead of ruling through constant enforcement, he ruled through layered loyalty. Local leaders governed their own people. Persian authority monitored rather than micromanaged. Tribute flowed to the center. Cultural life flowed locally. Power became quieter. This model faced its greatest test in 539 BCE when Cyrus marched on Babylon. Babylon was not merely another city, it was one of the great cultural and religious centers of the ancient world. Its walls were legendary, its temples were politically central. Its king, Nabonidus, had alienated segments of the population by neglecting the traditional worship of Marduk, Babylon's chief deity. Cyrus approached not only as a conqueror, but as a restorer. Babylon fell with minimal destruction. Contemporary Babylonian records suggest that Cyrus entered the city without widespread violence. Rather than proclaiming a foreign dominion, he presented himself as chosen by Marduk to restore proper worship and order. Temples were repaired, religious rites reinstated. Deportees, including Jewish communities exiled decades earlier, were permitted to return to their homelands. The document often cited in this context is the Cyrus Cylinder, a clay inscription discovered in the 19th century, recording Cyrus's proclamations. It describes him as a liberator who returned gods to their sanctuaries and restored disrupted traditions. Modern interpretations sometimes elevate the cylinder as an early declaration of human rights. That framing is imprecise. The text reflects political pragmatism more than universal principle. Cyrus was not articulating equality. He was reinforcing legitimacy. He conquered Babylon by claiming to save it. The effect was immediate. A city that might have resisted became cooperative. Religious elites endorsed him. Administrative continuity was maintained. Instead of suppressing identity, he aligned himself with it. At each stage, the pattern deepened. Assumption: eliminate difference to ensure control. Decision: preserve difference to ensure stability. Consequence: lower resistance, faster consolidation. Unintended result: legitimacy that extended beyond fear. Cyrus did not invent tolerance in the modern moral sense. He discovered its usefulness within imperial logic. Cyrus's conquests were decisive, but conquest alone does not build an empire. It creates territory. Governance creates endurance. After Babylon, the Persian realm stretched from the Iranian plateau to the eastern Mediterranean, from Anatolia to the edges of Central Asia. It encompassed dozens of languages, religions, and legal traditions. No single ruler could micromanage such diversity. If Persia were to endure, it required structure, not spectacle. Cyrus's solution was deceptively simple. Instead of imposing uniform administration, he divided the empire into large territorial units, later known as satrapies. Each province was governed by a satrap, often a local elite or a trusted Persian noble, responsible for maintaining order and delivering tribute. Crucially, local laws and customs were generally left intact. Temples continued to function, judicial systems continued to operate, cultural practices persisted. But beneath the surface, oversight was constant. Persian officials monitored military forces separately from civilian administration. Royal inspectors, later described by Greek historians as the king's eyes and ears, traveled across provinces to assess loyalty and performance. Tribute was standardized and assessed in measurable quantities. Infrastructure, including the royal road stretching from Sardis to Susa, ensured rapid communication. Assumption: diversity requires suppression. Decision: diversity can coexist with centralized extraction. Consequence: stability without constant rebellion. Unintended result: scale beyond precedent. Under Cyrus's successor, Cambyses, Egypt was added to the empire in 525 BCE. Even there, the pattern persisted. Persian rulers adopted pharaonic titles. Temples were respected. Religious rituals were maintained. Authority adjusted its presentation without relinquishing control. The true institutional architect of the empire, however, was Darius I, who came to power in 522 BCE, after a period of instability. Darius inherited Cyrus's territorial expanse, but faced revolts across several regions. His response was firm: military suppression where necessary, but followed by reorganization. Darius refined the satrapy system, standardizing tribute assessments across provinces. Each region's contribution was quantified in silver or goods, calculated according to local capacity. This was not arbitrary plunder. It was structured taxation. He also introduced a standardized imperial coinage, the gold daric, facilitating fiscal coordination across vast distances. Here again, abstraction supported governance. Tribute could be counted, transported, and deployed with efficiency. Diversity remained culturally intact, but fiscally integrated. What followed wasn't chaos, it was structure. The Persian Empire became the largest the world had yet seen, spanning 3 continents. It endured not because it erased difference, but because it managed it. This model of rule altered the psychology of empire. Subjects did not need to abandon their gods, languages, or customs. They needed only to accept Persian supremacy and fulfill obligations. For many local elites, this was preferable to annihilation. Cooperation became rational. Tolerance in this context was not sentimental, it was economical. Fear builds quickly, legitimacy builds slowly, but lasts longer. Cyrus and his successors understood that rebellion is expensive. Suppression drains resources. Incorporation, when possible, is cheaper. Meanwhile, the center remained unmistakably strong. The great king commanded loyalty from a vast court, controlled military forces, and maintained symbolic authority reinforced through ceremony and architecture. Persepolis itself became a visual expression of managed diversity. Reliefs depict delegations from across the empire bringing tribute, each in distinctive dress, each maintaining identity, all oriented toward the throne. The message was clear. Unity did not require sameness. For over 2 centuries this model held. Yet no system is without tension. Tolerance depends on strength at the center. Local autonomy is sustainable only if provincial leaders believe the imperial core can enforce order. When central authority weakens, diversity becomes fragmentation. In the later 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Persian Empire faced mounting pressures. Court intrigues destabilized succession. Military campaigns against Greek city-states strained resources. Satraps occasionally acted with increasing independence. Tribute still flowed, but loyalty grew more conditional. Meanwhile, beyond Persia's western frontier, a new force emerged. Alexander of Macedon inherited a smaller but highly disciplined kingdom in 336 BCE. His model of expansion differed in pace and psychology. Where Persia relied on administrative depth, Alexander relied on speed, charisma, and battlefield dominance. His army moved rapidly, targeting key centers of authority. When Alexander crossed into Asia Minor in 334 BCE, he encountered not a collapsed empire, but a stretched one. Satraps resisted, but coordination faltered. Local elites assessed incentives. Some resisted fiercely. Others calculated survival. The Persian system, built on layered loyalty, depended on belief in central inevitability. Once that inevitability wavered, cooperation shifted. Alexander defeated Darius III at Issus in 333 BCE and again decisively at Gaugamela in 331 BCE. The Persian imperial structure did not implode immediately, it was absorbed. Ironically, Alexander adopted many Persian administrative practices. He retained satraps, he respected local customs in Egypt and Babylon. He presented himself as legitimate successor rather than destroyer. The empire built on tolerance proved adaptable, even in defeat. This is the quiet complexity of Cyrus's legacy. He did not create a moral utopia. He created a scalable system. It reduced rebellion by lowering existential threat. It preserved identity while centralizing revenue. It expanded quickly because it did not demand cultural transformation. But scale always introduces strain. Local autonomy requires monitoring. Monitoring requires bureaucracy. Bureaucracy requires loyalty. Loyalty requires belief in permanence. Once belief weakens, diversity accelerates centrifugal forces. The Persian Empire endured for over 2 centuries, an extraordinary lifespan for such breadth. Its fall did not result from intolerance. It resulted from overstretch, succession crises, and the emergence of a rival system that prioritized velocity over administrative depth. This pattern is not unique to Persia. The Roman Republic, in its early expansion, extended citizenship gradually to conquered peoples, integrating elites rather than eliminating them. The Ottoman Empire governed through the millet system, allowing religious communities internal autonomy under imperial oversight. The British Empire often practiced indirect rule, preserving local authority structures while centralizing fiscal control. Each case reveals the same logic. Inclusion is cheaper than annihilation. Yet inclusion is never unconditional. It rests on hierarchy. It assumes that the center remains strong enough to arbitrate disputes and enforce compliance. When that strength erodes, autonomy becomes independence. Tolerance scales power until it exposes vulnerability. Cyrus understood something fundamental about human behavior. People resist erasure more than taxation. They fight harder to preserve identity than to avoid tribute. By allowing difference to survive, he removed the most powerful motive for rebellion. At the time, this seemed practical. It was. But practicality can build empires. The Persian Empire demonstrated that governance innovation can matter as much as military conquest. It showed that authority does not need to be loud to be effective. It can be present, structured, and embedded within existing traditions. Power worked best when it did not force transformation. The past is quiet. But it's never done speaking. Subscribe to the history of the world, because understanding how it worked is the first step to understanding where we are.